Every enterprise leader wants AI, but most can't even define what success looks like.
A lot of companies experiment with pilots, and I don't think they have a clear definition for success.
Ask yourself, if you launched an AI pilot tomorrow, how could you prove it actually worked? If you can't answer that, you're not ready to scale. My guest is Paul Bruffett, VP of Data and Analytics at Jack in the Box. He's built AI platforms for Starbucks, Accenture, and now one of America's top QSR chains. He knows what it takes to scale AI across the enterprise and where most teams go wrong. In this episode, you'll learn how to navigate the tension between experimentation and standardization, why technical debt is killing AI speed at the enterprise level, and how to balance automation with real human hospitality in QSR. And when I asked Paul what excites him most about AI's next wave in QSR, he told me,
some of these AI solutions are able to think differently than we think. See connections, causation that really aren't obvious to people, but
Hey everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of Reimagine with AI, brought to you by Sigmoid. I'm your host, Imtiaz Ahmed, and I help executive leaders create value with the smartest minds in artificial intelligence. You may not realize it, but behind every major innovation in retail, media, and technology, there's a team wrestling with how to make AI real and valuable inside massively complicated matrixed organizations. On this show, I sit down with the business and technology leaders who are doing exactly that. Reimagined AI explores how today's most forward-thinking enterprises are using data, AI, and automation to transform how they operate and how they grow. Because it's not just about adopting new tools, it's about reimagining what's possible. Let's get into it. Welcome everyone to Reimagine with AI by Sigmoid. Today I have the pleasure of having Paul Bruffett from Jack in the Box on the show today. Paul has built some of the most ambitious data and AI platforms across the world. At Starbucks, he helped design deepen, the machine learning engine that powers millions of customer experiences every day. At Accenture, he led global retail AI, deploying generative AI and autonomous agents at scale. And now, as the VP of Data and Analytics at Jack in the Box, he's applying those lessons to the fast-paced world of quick service restaurants. Paul doesn't just talk about data strategy, he's lived at the front lines of the Fortune 500 transformation. In this conversation, we're going to explore data and analytics, where data and analytics are already headed, and what most leaders still get wrong, and how AI is shaping everything from personalization to supply chain to customer engagement. Welcome to the show, Paul.
thanks for having me, and thanks for your very generous introduction.
Oh, good. So quick service restaurants, they run at massive scale, thousands of stores, millions of transactions daily. What's been the hardest part of building data infrastructure that can handle that amount of volume, velocity, and variety?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think as we are finding, and as a lot of companies are finding, digital first experiences generate massive amounts of data. So we're used to handling transactions, right? Transactions from point of sale systems. But now that we continue to invest more in digital experiences, both first party and third party delivery, we get even more information about customers. And of course, our business wants to use that in order to unlock new insights, to drive new experiences, promotions, the whole thing, right? And so I think the challenge is keeping up with the business appetite for insights. It's not a new problem for data teams, but it's become turbocharged, right? With both new AI advancements where we want to unlock and utilize the data for those, and for these new digital experiences that both we want to use the insights to adapt, and we want to augment with more personalization, with more AI, right? With more tailored experiences for those guests. And so I think it's this continuous challenge, right? If we get more information, we deliver more insights, and it just increases the appetite for insights from our business stakeholders. So how do we keep up with that? How do we democratize the data and really empower our business users? It's an ongoing challenge that's only become more difficult, frankly, for data teams, including my own.
I want to ask a deeper question here is, how do commercial stakeholders who actually use all of this data, really prioritize the volume of stuff that's, able to be processed right now, right? So you have data coming in from left, right, and center. You have all of these generative AI tools coming on top of that. What's been your take on how to really focus on what really matters to quick service restaurants, or even just, running a commercial organization?
Yeah, I mean, so our model at Jack in the Box is we have a very strong product ownership group. We have a lot of product owners that are dedicated to domains. That's extremely helpful for us to both understand and interface with our business users and define and drive the future. So that's one element. But the other challenge, I think, that this concept of known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns, a lot of times now with this new data, our business stakeholders don't even necessarily know what to ask for, right? Both because there's so much data at our disposal, and the insights are kind of buried in that, right? And so it's like, well, I don't even know what to ask for. What can you give me? But then that menu is so large now, it becomes overwhelming. And so I think part of the challenge remains, how do we sift those insights and really help our business users understand what we can offer them? And so that's part of where we're looking for AI solutions to help a little bit, right? With that analysis and identifying maybe relevant insights, interesting trends, correlations, and things like that, that frankly, people just can't keep up with in this day and age. I think the other element is data products, right? How can we build modular data solutions for folks to self-service on and accelerate that time to value for our maybe more technically sophisticated hands-on stakeholders, and kind of meeting folks where they live. So a few different tactics, because that's a really central plank to the challenge that we're trying to solve as a data team.
So looking back at Starbucks Deep Brew and now at Jack in the Box, what were some of the key architectural decisions that made the difference in terms of scaling out AI across the enterprise, or more specifically across the data and analytics workspace?
Yeah, I think one of the key challenges for data science solutions is this inherent tension between moving fast, giving data science teams the tools that they want, the autonomy to run experiments and move at the speed of the business, versus as you start to have a lot of success, it's what Google talked about of the AI solutions being the high interest rate credit cards of technical debt. As you build more and more of them, and as they rely on each other, you introduce a lot of challenges that frankly teams historically weren't used to addressing. And so it's this tension, right? And so at Jack in the Box, frankly, we're still a little bit earlier in our journey, right? We're driving personalization and forecasting and optimization, but we're still really moving fast and capturing value. But at Starbucks, as you noted with Deep Brew, we had a little bit of a different problem where now it was actually taking longer to get AI solutions to our business and to market, because we had so many different ones and they were bespoke. So we really leaned into standardization and accelerating the ML lifecycle and value chain. And so I think it's a little bit of the problem differs based on where you are in that maturity journey. But for us, it's really delivering value, showing the value and capturing that value for our business stakeholders, and then standardizing kind of frankly along behind it. At Starbucks, we were already well into that journey and really advanced in that standardization. And that's why Deep Brew really came to life, to help us scale and realize even more AI use cases, but very efficiently.
Technical debt is such a huge topic at the moment, specifically with so much infrastructure investments that have been made across Fortune 500 companies across the board. Looking at what is actually going to deliver value in this new AI timeframe is technically a challenge that everyone wants to solve. But when you have so much differences between, let's say, different regions or business units or different markets, it's certainly becoming more this added complexity with this new capability is just making everything more and more confused. So there's that inherent tension between automation and the human element of customer service. Does relying more on AI diminish that hospitality experience, or can it actually make the human interaction even more meaningful?
I think it can make it more meaningful. I think it depends on the brands and both their identity and how brands choose to adopt it. And maybe to take Starbucks as another example, right? One of the powers that Deep Brew has that I think deepens the connection and shows that Starbucks understands the customer is it doesn't recommend meat-based products to people that don't buy meat-based products, right? And so it shows that, hey, there's an understanding, an inferred understanding that hopefully deepens that connection and makes that person feel a little bit more, makes the brand feel a little bit more relevant to that person. But then on the other side of that, you see a little bit of a dial back into maybe some of the human-centric connection, closing some of the stores that were pickup only, for example, and moving back to the coffee house roots. I think that's relevant for every business, including Jack in the Box, where now we're adding kiosks to more stores. And folks really like that. I really like that. My kids really like that because they like being able to browse the menu and not feeling that pressure of somebody behind you in the line to say, well, I already know what I want. Our average check tends to be a little bit higher on some of these kiosks. And that's because people browse and they add more things than they might have done talking to a human. And so to me, other businesses, and now even Starbucks, it seems, are really kind of at a crossroads, right? Of how do you adopt AI to make yourself more relevant to customers while maintaining the human touch? Some places use that to pull back on labor and have fewer people, right? I go to some QSRs and there's nobody there anymore, right? They're all in the kitchen and it's all kiosks. And that does diminish the customer experience in a lot of cases. diminishes my experience. And so I think we're kind of at a crossroads, and a lot of places are at a crossroads for adopting it and deepening your connection, which we're doing with improved personalization as well in our digital experience, while not sort of taking it to the extreme and making it so that people can't find somebody to help them as they go through, right?
It's really interesting, the adage of "Would you like fries with that?" at a kiosk is now on steroids, because
Yeah.
that fries could be a trade up to the next size meal. It could be a dish, or it could be a dessert menu item on top. It could be so many different things. And if people are obviously subscribed into the loyalty program as well, it could be massively personalized at the same time. So if AI takes over these routine transactions, these very basic things that happen within QSR, what role do you see humans playing in delivering the hospitality side of the quick service industry?
Yeah, I mean, my hope is that folks can really lean in and focus on customer connection, right? For the folks that want to use a kiosk or the digital channel, right, and just go in, pick it up, right, and they really enjoy that self-service, I think it's important to meet people where they are and give folks the experience that they want, right? Give folks options. But hopefully it means that the folks in the restaurants can really focus on building a connection, right? In chatting with folks, understanding what they're trying to do, and making recommendations, right? And helping folks understand the menu, the offerings, our new promotions, things like that. I'd love to see people be able to spend the time there for the guests that want it, and as a result, deepen that connection that we were talking about, right?
So from a practical AI value creation point of view, you've experimented with generative AI and now even autonomous agents. What are the more realistic near-term use cases for these technologies inside of the QSR value chain?
Yeah, generative AI is interesting. It's a little bit like search. It feels like, where folks have a great experience in their personal life. I go to Google, I find things almost immediately. But then in the corporate context, it tends to be much diminished, frankly, right? I go to find things and the search returns a bunch of irrelevant results and I have to dig for it and then just ask somebody. Generative AI, it feels like, is in the same spot for a lot of companies, ones that I worked with in consulting and even us internally, right? Where it's more difficult to apply to an enterprise context. And so you go use it in your personal life to do whatever, right? Make reports and itineraries and the like, and get a lot of value out of it. And then applied to corporate life, it seems like it's much diminished, frankly. And I think that is because it's difficult to integrate, right? It's difficult to integrate their systems. It's difficult to get the right permissions and privacy to make sure it's giving folks the right answer, because the stakes are different in an enterprise context, right? If I give people the wrong answer for why one of our promotions did or didn't perform, that could be significantly impactful for us, right? Whereas if it gives me a recommendation for a restaurant that's closed, the stakes are a little bit lower. And so I think for us, it's kind of that enterprise preparedness, right? How can we get our data? How can we get our systems ready for generative AI? And frankly, the unfortunate truth is that tends to be slower than we would like, right? Our systems aren't enterprise ready. I worked with a lot of companies before trying Jack in the Box where they didn't have APIs to integrate, right? I worked with a telco that wanted to apply it, but to take any action to make it useful for employees and for customers, it has to reach into systems. Those systems weren't ready to be reached into, right? They weren't ready for generative AI. And so the models were sophisticated and continue to get more sophisticated, but really allowing it to deliver value in enterprise context kind of meets up with some of those systems that maybe we haven't touched for 10 years. And they're really they're not ready for that. And so that tends to be kind of the iceberg under the water for applying some of these technologies, for getting some of the value out of these technologies that was there with machine learning. It remains there with generative AI. It's just an even more powerful tool. It's an even faster car on top of these systems that may be kind of potholed roads, frankly.
I remember launching direct-to-consumer websites back in my old company, and the product catalog was, let's say, only 30 items for that particular brand. And a general manager of the business came through, and he'd attended some e-commerce seminar, and they were talking about the importance of search. So he went to the brand direct-to-consumer website and freaked out that there wasn't a search bar. And I'm like, there's only 30 SKUs in one product category. Yeah. And there is there's on-site navigation in terms of finding what you want to do. You don't necessarily need to have every piece of technology or every, shiny new thing. available within your business immediately to really solve that customer problem. And I think this is where like the challenge actually lies with all of this new stuff is we think technology first rather than are we actually solving something for the end customer first.
Yeah.
Um, so where do you think QSRs are underestimating the value and the power of these new AI solutions that are coming? Is it across the marketing side of the equation, or the supply chain, or pricing, or where do you see the value really coming in the next few years?
Yeah. I mean, I think marketing is a big one. I don't think it's underestimated because I think that's the one that I hear the most about, right? Is how is it going to change, one-to-one communications or really enable it? Because very few businesses really do one-to-one communication. At best, they do a few, to a few audiences of a few, I mean. And so I think that one's actually fully appreciated. I think that's kind of fully costed out, to be honest. I think supply chain is a big area, both at Jack in the Box. Supply chain is essential for us, right? I mean, it's one of our biggest cost drivers is, the labor and the actual food, right? And especially with all the uncertainty going on right now, supply chain agility is paramount, and and has been for a while, right? Through COVID, now through some of the economic uncertainty and turbulence, right? And so I think that one is a huge opportunity area. Back to the previous discussion, it is a little bit of a challenge. In consulting, I worked with a number of businesses, and getting the data together in a supply chain control tower, whatever you want to call it, supply chain data product, tends to be, frankly, a lot of work because it's from disparate systems and different units of measure. And so making it AI ready, again, remains a challenge. But I think building algorithms both to do improved forecasting and critically scenario planning and optimization will be a real big differentiator for companies that are able to take advantage of that.
So most QSR executives know that they need AI, but struggle to translate that into action. What separates the companies that experiment with pilots from those who truly transform?
That's a good question. I mean, a lot of companies, to your point, experiment with pilots, and I don't think they have a clear definition for success, frankly. I think the challenge tends to be you try it, you're really not sure if it drove business value or not. And so if there's a stakeholder, maybe they drive it forward, maybe they don't. I think companies that have a clear definition of success, a clear metric they're trying to drive, average order value, net incremental revenue, customer retention, whatever those are, and a clear way to measure and test for it in a quantified way, I think those are the ones that both see the value of it and are able to drive executive alignment and continued investment thereby. I think a lot of companies say, well, we need to do something with AI. We need to do something with generative AI. And experiment with it. But again, because there's not that clear business outcome, there's no business justification for continued investment, because the MVP tends to be reasonably affordable, but then to scale it, to harden it, to operationalize it and apply it to new business use cases tends to be quite a bit of work, frankly, and to build the infrastructure to support more algorithms. And so I think a lot of businesses find it tapers off because there's not a clear business justification or return on investment for it.
So you've taught data science as a professor and led data teams globally. What advice would you give the hospitality leaders trying to build AI-ready organizations today?
Yeah, I think for a lot of organizations, both AI-ready and otherwise, there's a book from Reed Hastings that came out recently where he talked about Netflix's keeper test and talent density. And I think that really resonated with me because the whole objective was, hey, if you have great teams full of high-performing folks that want to be there, that you would fight to retain if you found they were going to leave, you'll achieve your objectives much faster, right? Those teams are dramatically more high-performing than teams that are just okay because the people are there, right? And so I think both for AI-ready organizations, but even in general, it's those high-performing, talent-dense teams that you're going to find are differentiated. With AI, it tends to be also a matter of giving folks the right opportunities and skills. And I think we always get trapped a little bit of, hey, we need people that understand generative AI, or we need people that understand, before it was big data or even data science. But I think a lot of organizations forget that really a couple of years ago, 4 years ago, probably, there really weren't basically anybody that understood the, generative AI in this case. Very few, right? It was predominantly research. And so I think we also have to create the space for the folks that understand our business, that understand our systems, and that want to learn the ability to upskill and cross-skill into these technologies. And so I really try to make sure in my teams and in my organization, we do that wherever possible. And I think it tends to be overlooked a little bit. And we always look outside. And sometimes that's necessary, right? But a lot of times I think it's possible for people to become experts in these technologies, because that's what a lot of folks that, before were specialists in the metaverse and Web3, that's really what they did, right? And so sometimes it's easy to forget that.
So the way I think about it is, one is having the ability to unlearn what's always worked, and to relearn what will work. And not a lot of, and obviously the bigger you get from an enterprise point of view, the more difficult it is to throw away your established process, your SOPs, etc., and then start from scratch. But given this new technology that's coming and it's already here, it seems like there is a lot of business process that needs to be ripped up and shredded and started from scratch. If you had the ability and the budget, and I think budget's probably the biggest one, to look at an incumbent process that is so messed up or so cumbersome within quick service retail, what is something do you think that machine learning or AI could really add a ton of quick value to most quick service restaurants?
Yeah, I tell you what is, I won't say it's an inefficient process, but the one I'm most excited about, the one that I think is the most interesting and compelling, is ideation and innovation. I mean, I was just reading a day or two ago about breweries that were using generative AI to ideate on new recipes. And it somewhat goes back to that example of, when AlphaGo made moves that everybody was kind of scratching their head about and assumed were errors. Some of these AI solutions are able to think differently than we think, right? And see connections, causation, that really aren't obvious to people, but tend to be a pretty good idea. I think the example was this brewery, they used a different kind of malt than they would have usually used for the specific kind of product they were brewing. And it worked really well, they found, right? And so not all these ideas I think are going to be home runs, but I'm really interested in how some artificial intelligence solutions can help ideate on new products, menu offerings, tastes, right, and profiles that may not be obvious to folks, but turn out to be really compelling and different, right, than people are used to and enjoyable. And so that's a little bit different side of it, right? But I'm interested to see where that goes. And it seems like an increasing number of companies, including in hospitality, are starting to use it that way. So I'll be curious to see where it goes.
I attended a presentation from a global cosmetics company, and they had uploaded all of their historical R&D research, consumer research, ingredient research, etc., into an LLM, and essentially gave access to multiple users across different markets to all of this research that they had. And then secondly, they mixed that with social signals. So in terms of what's happening in social media right now, for a specific region or zone, could they find research or an ingredient or a product set that worked in a different market, bring it to this market, given what's happening in social? So the repository of knowledge, or the repository of research sitting in all of these Fortune 500 companies over the years is massive. And it's very hard for a marketing director or an innovation person to have historical knowledge of everything in that company, over the last 30, 40, 50 years. So I do think it's a great use case for organizational memory being available to specific users to do innovation, to do ideation, and then bring products or bring new menu items to market based on the historical research that's already been done specifically for other markets or other regions within the US, for example. And then
we've got something similar on our side where we've got this rich qualitative research, right? Where we've gone out and done surveys and built these really rich decks of why do people engage with the brand? How do they engage with the brand, right? And it's survey-based data though. And so it's been kind of handcrafted, curated, right? But then we have all this information from the digital signals that we're getting from people that are transacting in our apps, right? And so marrying those two together is definitely an opportunity, a little bit like what you're talking about. How can we kind of unlock the insights from both of those pools of information? And we definitely need tools like generative artificial intelligence to do that, because that's why they've historically been disparate, right? One are PDFs and PowerPoints and kind of locked away in the repository from customer insights teams, and the other is now in our data warehouse and completely siloed, right? And so contextualizing both of those is definitely an opportunity that our business is excited about. I think probably will be one of our earlier generative AI use cases, kind of that knowledge synthesis, information retrieval, right? Which they really excel at.
So you've deployed AI at multiple companies. If you look at the next 5 years out, what does the next wave of AI in the QSR industry look like to you?
Yeah. My crystal ball is as foggy as anybody's, but I actually really hope, I'll tell you what I hope, is that it comes back to some optimization and reinforcement learning. So actually, when I was in oil and gas, we worked with Microsoft pretty extensively, and they bought a company called Bonsai that I think they've since shuttered. But I was really optimistic about that because they did simulation for like drilling rigs even to say, well, if these things happen, what do we think the outcomes will be? The problem, I don't know, maybe the technology wasn't ready because it was so hard to structure the simulation space that it really didn't take off, right? If I know all the things to actually structure the simulation, then I've kind of already answered all my questions, right? The problem is I don't know a lot of those things. I'm hoping that as the technology matures, we'll be able to reevaluate some of those and get better decision aids and simulation and scenario planning solutions for the business. I'm sure generative AI will continue to evolve, and I'm optimistic about some of those. But I'd really like to see how we could make AI like applicable to broader sections of our data, and maybe for more comprehensive outcomes that really are like decision aids for the business, if that makes sense. Because I think in a lot of cases today, we just put an algorithm on top, we forecast, and we say, well, that's it. That's the answer, right? But really what the business is trying to do is explore options, explore opportunities, and quantify some of the possible trade-offs and uncertainty inherent in that. And frankly, that's still a challenge for a lot of companies, I feel like.
So everyone's talking about personalization, but QSR is fundamentally a scale business. Where do you see AI making the biggest leap in how customers order, pay, and receive food?
Yeah, no, that's also a great question. I mean, I think a lot of companies are experimenting with automation in the kitchen, in the restaurants. I haven't seen a lot of QSRs dramatically change their operations based on that, just because there's a lot of flexibility that's required. It's a challenging job for these folks, right? I think there'll be more in-store experiences, more kind of linking your in-store experience with the digital profile that you've built up, both in the kiosks, but I'm hoping in a broader way that honestly, I don't even know what it looks like yet, right? There's definitely a balance. I think Starbucks Korea has license plate scanners, if I remember correctly, where they'll automatically try to identify your order, right? And say, well, if you've chosen to link them, then you drive up and they just start it, right? And they populate your order. There are a lot of countries wouldn't be very excited about that, I think. And so there's a little bit of a balance. I also think some of our competitors have previously experimented with more dynamic pricing in the stores. That also got a negative reaction. So I think there's such a thing as too much, right? The basics of the industry, quality, it's menu innovations, having clean stores, timely food, you get what you ordered. I think a lot of those building blocks have remained the same for a long time and probably continue to do so. I just hope that we can bring a little bit more of the digital into the physical, which still, other than kiosks, is early days, I think, for us and for a lot of companies, while, back to your previous point, maintaining that human touch, maintaining that personal element for the folks that want that experience. So maybe your guess is as good as mine, but there are a few things in there that I hope to see.
I think, it comes back to the fundamentals. When you're in the QSR industry, if you don't get the basics right, focusing on all of these superfluous, really gimmicky things sometimes feels very pointless. So I think it's, meeting the customer's expectations is obviously the most important thing. But then, you need to surprise and delight them. And I think that's where the technology comes in. But we need to make sure that we have everything in order at first, of course. So yeah, Paul, it's been a pleasure having you on the show today. Thank you for all of your insights. We look forward to having you again on the show in the future.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
That was my conversation with Paul Bruffett, and what stood out to me was how deeply we're rethinking what it really takes to make AI work inside of complex legacy systems, especially in industries like quick service restaurants that run on volume, velocity, and razor-thin margins. We covered why personalization only works if your systems are ready for it, how technical debt can quietly kill AI momentum, and what separates companies that pilot AI from those who truly scale it. And the most surprising insight? The biggest opportunity might not be in automation or marketing, it could just be in how we reimagine innovation itself. If this episode gave you something to think about, send it to someone who's figuring out how to apply AI beyond the hype. And if you want to keep learning about how leaders are applying AI to drive real-world results, hit the subscribe button and leave us a review from wherever you're listening. Thank you for being part of the Reimagine with AI community. I'll see you next time.